The scent of pine and petrichor was Lyra's constant companion. It was the smell of the Blackwood pack, the only home she had ever known. For 22 years, she had navigated its winding paths and towering halls not with sight, but with sound, scent, and the subtle shift of air currents against her skin. She was the Oracle, the pack's seer, a title that felt less like an honor and more like a gilded cage. Her world was a tapestry of whispers. The rustle of leaves told her of the wind's mood, the firmness of the packed earth beneath her bare feet spoke of recent travel, and the hushed, reverent tones of the pack members who came to her for guidance painted pictures of their fears and hopes. But the true visions, the ones that mattered, came unpredictably and at a great cost, searing headaches and a profound, isolating emptiness that followed. The Alpha returns. A young warrior's voice echoed from the main gate, a ripple of excitement following the announcement. Lyra, seated on her customary stone bench in the courtyard, stilled. Alpha Zade. The name alone was a presence, a low thrum of power that she felt in the marrow of her bones. He was new to his title, having inherited it after his father's sudden death 6 months prior. He was young, fierce, and, according to the whispers, dangerously ambitious. He had never sought her counsel, a fact for which she was silently grateful. The powerful were often the most difficult to read, their futures a tangled, blinding knot of will and consequence. The courtyard, once serene, became a symphony of controlled chaos. Boots crunched on gravel, armor clinked, and the air grew thick with the scent of sweat, leather, and the distinct, potent aroma of dominant wolves. Lyra kept her head bowed, her milky white eyes fixed on nothing, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wished to be invisible, a part of the scenery. The footsteps halted before her. The other sounds faded into a respectful, waiting silence. The air grew heavy, charged with an authority that was impossible to ignore. Oracle. The voice was like rough velvet, deep and resonant, cutting through the quiet. It was him. Lyra inclined her head. Alpha Zade. Welcome home. I am told you see what others cannot, he stated, his tone not unkind, but direct, probing. My scouts report increased patrols from the Shadow Fen pack along our northern border. I need clarity. I need to know if they are testing our strength or merely posturing. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she had dreaded. The visions do not come on command, Alpha. They are fickle. Then I will wait, he replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. She heard the shift of his weight, felt the heat of his body as he stepped closer. My father relied on your predecessor's sight. I would be a fool not to utilize every weapon in my arsenal. A weapon. That's all she was to him. A tool. My Alpha, a elder's voice, that of Kaelin, the pack's beater, interjected cautiously. The Oracle's gifts are not to be summoned like a hound. Perhaps in the seclusion of her chambers. She is the Oracle of the Blackwood pack, Zade interrupted, his voice hardening. And I am its Alpha. I will not tiptoe around my own territory. Before Lyra could form a protest, she felt his presence directly in front of her. The warmth of his body was a tangible force. Then, his fingers brushed against hers. It was an electric shock, a jolt that stole her breath. His skin was calloused from wielding a sword, but his touch was surprisingly deliberate. The moment their hands connected, the world did not just go dark, it exploded. A searing, white-hot pain lanced through her skull, and behind her sightless eyes, a vision erupted with the force of a tidal wave. Not a premonition of war or borders, but of him. Of Zade. His face, no longer a mystery, was carved from moonlight and shadow, all sharp angles and a stark, brutal beauty. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, were not looking at the Oracle, but at her. At Lyra. And they were filled with a possessive, devastating tenderness. She saw herself, not in her simple grey robes, but in the ceremonial silks of the Luna, standing by his side under a full moon. She felt the weight of a crown of woven silver on her brow, felt the heat of his hand in hers, this very hand, as the entire pack bowed before them. She felt his lips claim hers in a kiss that was not of conquest, but of a fierce, unyielding devotion. The vision was saturated with a sense of rightness, of a destiny so profound it felt like the closing of a celestial circle. Then, just as suddenly, it shattered. Lyra gasped, wrenching her hand back as if burned. She stumbled off the bench, falling to her knees on the cold stone, her body trembling violently. The familiar emptiness after a vision was gone, replaced by a terrifying, thrilling fullness. The image of herself as Luna was branded onto her soul. What is it? Zade's voice was sharp, concerned. What did you see? Was it the shadow fen? Lyra lifted her head, her breath coming in ragged pants. She could still feel the ghost of his touch, the echo of that impossible future. How could she tell him? How could she voice a vision that would bind her, the blind seer, to him, the formidable Alpha, in a way she had never dared to imagine? Well, he pressed, his impatience a thin veil over a flicker of something else, alarm, perhaps. Tears she could not shed welled in her useless eyes. Her voice was a broken whisper, carrying the weight of a prophecy that had just rewritten her entire world. I saw us. The silence in the courtyard was absolute, a physical weight pressing in on Lyra from all sides. She could feel the shock radiating from the assembled pack members, a collective intake of breath held in suspension. But the most potent force, the epicenter of the storm, was the man standing before her. Alpha Zade. He did not speak. The air around him grew colder, tighter, charged with a disbelief so profound it was like a vacuum. Lyra could imagine his expression, the sharp, handsome features frozen, the stormy eyes narrowed, dissecting her, searching for a lie, a trick, a sign of madness. Us, he finally repeated, the single word a low, dangerous growl that vibrated through the stone beneath her knees. It was not a question. It was a demand for retraction. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, the phantom sensation of the lunar silk still clinging to her skin, a cruel mockery of her simple, rough-spun robes. The vision had been more real than the cold stone, more tangible than the scent of pine. The rightness of it warred violently with the sheer impossibility. Explain, Zade commanded, his voice cutting through her turmoil. I cannot, she whispered, her voice trembling. The visions show what they will. They are not literal. The lie tasted like ash on her tongue. It had never felt more literal. A bitter laugh, sharp and humorless, came from beside Zade. Kaelin, the beater. You see, my Alpha? This is the fickle nature of the sight. Visions can be metaphors, echoes of potentialities. An image of unity, perhaps, in the face of the coming conflict with Shadow Fen. It does not mean what she says. Lyra felt a flicker of gratitude toward the older wolf, even as she despised the cowardice that made her cling to his interpretation. Zade's footsteps echoed as he paced a slow, predatory circle around her kneeling form. She felt like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a wolf, her every instinct screaming to flee, yet her body was rooted to the spot. Look at me, Oracle, he ordered, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. You know I cannot, Alpha, she replied, her own voice gaining a sliver of steel. Her blindness was her shield, her only defense against the intensity she knew was burning in his gaze. He stopped his pacing, his presence looming over her. Then speak to me. You trembled. You fell. That was not the reaction to a vague metaphor. What, precisely, did you see? The entire pack was listening. Their oracle, their blind guide, had just proclaimed a future that would upend the pack's hierarchy. A Luna was chosen for strength, for bloodline, for political alliance. Not pulled from the shadows because of a fleeting touch. Lyra drew a shaky breath, choosing her words with the care of a miner handling dynamite. I saw a union. Under the moon. The pack, they bowed. She could not bring herself to say the rest. To us. To you and me. The air crackled. She heard a few muffled gasps, quickly silenced. A union, Zade repeated, his tone indecipherable. You saw yourself as my Luna. It was not a question. It was a statement, laid bare before the entire courtyard. The truth, once spoken, could not be unspoken. The weight of it settled over the clearing, suffocating and absolute. The vision showed it, Lyra conceded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I report what is shown to me. I do not interpret it to suit, comfort. A challenge. A faint one, but it was there. She felt a shift in his energy, a spark of something that wasn't quite anger. Curiosity, perhaps. Annoyance, certainly. Kaelin, Zade said, his attention snapping away from her, the dismissal in his tone as sharp as a blade. Take the oracle to her chambers. She is clearly overwhelmed by her gift. She is to remain there until I summon her again. Confinement. Her gilded cage had just had its bars reinforced. Yes, Alpha, Kalen said, his voice heavy. Strong, gentle hands, Kalen's, closed around Lyra's upper arm, helping her to her feet. Her legs felt like water. As he led her away, she was acutely aware of Zade's gaze burning into her back. She could feel the turmoil rolling off him in waves, confusion, fury, and a reluctant, unwelcome fascination. The walk through the familiar halls of the pack house felt like a march to the gallows. The whispers started up again, but these were different. No longer reverent, they were laced with shock, speculation, and an undercurrent of derision. The blind oracle? Our Luna? Has she lost her mind? It's an affront to the Alpha station. You should not have said that, child, Kalen murmured once they were inside the quiet solitude of her chambers, the door shut firmly behind them. Not in front of everyone. What should I have done, Kalen? Lyra asked, her voice weary as she sank onto her bed. Lied to my Alpha. Sometimes, a partial truth is kinder than a destructive one, he sighed. Zade is not his father. He is uncompromising. He is building his authority, and you have just presented him with a prophecy that either makes him look a fool or challenges his right to choose his own mate. I did not ask for this, Lyra whispered, the words a desperate plea. I touched his hand, and it was like lightning. The vision was forced upon me. It felt final. Kalen was silent for a long moment. Final or not? Lyra, you have set a dangerous game in motion. The Alpha does not like his path chosen for him. And there are others who will see this as a weakness to be exploited. He left her then, the click of the lock a sound of grim finality. Lyra brought her fingers to her lips, the memory of the kiss from her vision searing her soul. It had felt like coming home. But here, in the chilling silence of her locked room, with the echo of the pack's disbelief ringing in her ears, that feeling of destiny felt like a death sentence. She had seen her future, and in doing so, she may have just destroyed her present. The silence in her chambers was a living entity, thick and suffocating. For 3 days, it was her only companion, broken only by the soft-footed arrival of a young she-wolf who would leave meals by her door without a word. Lyra was accustomed to solitude, but this was different. This was the silence of a prisoner. The familiar sounds of the pack, the distant laughter, the clang of practiced swords, the low murmur of daily life, felt muffled and far away, as if she were listening to the world from the bottom of a well. Her world had shrunk to the 4 walls of her room and the relentless echo of the vision. It replayed behind her eyes in a torturous loop, the weight of the silver crown, the warmth of Zade's hand, the devastating tenderness in his stormy eyes. Each time, a treacherous warmth would bloom in her chest, only to be extinguished by the cold reality of her confinement. He had locked her away. The man in her vision, who looked at her as if she were the moon itself, had dismissed her as an inconvenience, a problem to be contained. On the morning of the 4th day, the lock on her door clicked. Lyra, who had been seated by her window feeling the weak sun on her face, stiffened. It wasn't the timid shuffle of the meal server. These footsteps were firm, confident, and carried a scent of cold night air and alpha power that made the hair on her arms stand up. Zade. He didn't speak immediately. She heard the door shut, felt his presence fill the room, making the air thin and difficult to breathe. He was assessing her, this caged bird who had sung such an inconvenient song. Have you had any more revelations, Oracle? His voice was cool, devoid of the heat from the courtyard. This was the voice of a ruler conducting an inquiry. Lyra kept her face turned toward the window. The visions do not come on command, Alpha. You were told this. A low rumble, almost a growl, vibrated in his chest. Do not mock me. You proclaimed a future that affects the stability of this entire pack before a crowd of my warriors. I need to know if it was a true seeing or the desperate fantasy of a secluded woman. The cruelty of the words struck her like a physical blow. She flinched, her hands curling into fists in her lap. I have served this pack since I was a child, she said, her voice low but steady. I have guided your warriors to safety, warned of famines, located lost children. My fantasies, as you call them, have saved lives. You may doubt me, Alpha, but you will not insult me. Silence followed. She had never spoken to any alpha in such a manner. She braced for his fury, for the snap of his power that would force her submission. It didn't come. Instead, she heard him take a step closer. The scent of him, wilderness, leather, and something uniquely, intensely male, wrapped around her. "Then help me understand," he said, and for the first time, she heard a crack in his controlled facade. A thread of frustration. Of genuine confusion. "What I felt, when we touched. It was not nothing." Lyra's breath hitched. He had felt it too. The lightning. The connection. "It was the vision breaking through," she whispered, her defiance melting into a shared bewilderment. "It has never been like that before. It was violent. Absolute." "Absolute," he repeated, the word hanging between them. "You saw us as mates." She nodded, unable to speak the confirmation aloud again. The word mates was too intimate, too primal. It implied a bond that went far beyond a political union. "Why you?" The question was blunt, not meant to be cruel, but searching. "You are the Oracle. You are meant to see threats and opportunities for the pack. Why would a mating vision be forced upon you? Upon us?" "I don't know," she admitted, a fresh wave of helplessness washing over her. "The gift has its own will. It shows what it deems necessary, not what we desire." "And do you?" he pressed, moving so close now that the heat from his body was a brand against her side. "Do you desire this?" The question was a trap, a precipice. To say yes would be to admit to ambition, to a longing that felt absurd given her station. To say no would be to lie. And she had a feeling he would sense it, that the strange connection between them would betray her. And she could feel Zade. His presence was a blazing bonfire of resolve and controlled fury, moving through the packhouse like a general, his energy sharp and focused. But beneath that, a thread of the same confusion that had filled her chambers still pulsed. He was dividing his attention, and in a fight against a pack like Shadow Fen, a divided alpha was a vulnerable one. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the frantic energy solidified into a grim readiness. Lyra heard the distinct sound of the war party assembling in the main courtyard, shifting armor, the whisper of steel being drawn and inspected, the low, guttural growls of wolves preparing to embrace their beast forms. She had to reach him. Not for herself, not for the vision, but for the pack. Pressing her ear to the thick wood of her door, she waited. She filtered out the chaos, focusing on the one frequency she was becoming attuned to against her will. Then, she heard it. The firm, heavy tread of his boots, moving down the corridor just outside her wing, likely on his way to address his warriors. Zade. She didn't call him Alpha. She used his name, the word a raw, desperate plea thrown into the silence of her prison. She slammed the flat of her palm against the door for emphasis. Thud. The footsteps halted. She held her breath, praying he had heard her over the din. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing. Then, the slow, deliberate approach. He didn't unlock the door, but she sensed him on the other side, a wall of simmering impatience. "This is not the time, Oracle." His voice was a low, dangerous growl through the wood. "It is the only time," she insisted, pressing her forehead against the door, her voice urgent. "Listen to me, please. They're Alpha, Vorlag. He is not just testing your borders. He is old, and he is cunning. He doesn't fight for land, he fights for legacy. He believes crushing a young, untested Alpha will cement his own name in their histories." "I know my enemy," Zade bit out. "Do you?" Lyra fired back. "He favors the western pass, not the main trail. The rocks are treacherous, but they provide high ground for an ambush. He will have archers there, tipped with wolfsbane. I can smell the poison on the air of their intentions." She poured every ounce of her focus into the words, channeling the sensory fragments her gift provided, the sharp, bitter tang of the wolfsbane, the echo of rock falls, the arrogant, grizzled voice of Vorlag she'd caught in the psychic currents. Silence from the other side. It was a heavier, more considering silence. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked, his voice closer, as if he too had leaned his head against the door. "After I caged you." "Because I am not your enemy," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, laced with a pain she no longer bothered to conceal. This pack is my home. Its blood is my blood. My vision changes nothing about that duty. Lock me away for 1,000 years, and I would still warn you of a blade at your back." She heard his sharp intake of breath. The door remained locked, but the barrier between them felt thinner, more permeable. "The Western Pass," he repeated, his tone now analytical, the general pushing past the conflicted man. "It's a gamble. If we're wrong, we leave the main trail undefended." "Trust your oracle," Lyra whispered. "If not your Luna." The words hung in the air, a challenge and an offering. She heard him push away from the door. "Kalen," he barked, his voice once again the Alpha's, full of command. "Change of plans. The main force takes the Western Pass. Scouts only on the Northern Trail. And someone get a healer prepared for wolfsbane poisoning." His orders were crisp, decisive. As his footsteps retreated, swift and sure, Lyra slid down the length of the door, landing in a heap on the floor. Her body trembled with the effort of the seeing and the emotional toll of their exchange. He had listened. He had trusted her, not the vision of their shared future, but her word as his oracle. It was a fragile thread, but it was something real. As the sounds of the departing war party faded into the distance, Lyra was left alone in the dark, the scent of blood and iron slowly being replaced by the cold night air, and the fragile, terrifying ember of hope that she had been right, both about the enemy and about the man. The silence that fell over the Blackwood packhouse was deeper and more profound than any Lyra had ever known. It was the silence of held breath, of collective dread. With the warriors gone, the stronghold was a hollowed-out shell, populated only by the old, the young, and the few guards left to protect them. Every creak of timber, every whisper of the wind, was a potential herald of doom. Lyra remained on the floor, her back against the locked door. She had withdrawn so deeply into her other senses that the physical world felt distant. She was a vessel, and the currents of fate were flowing through her in turbulent, chaotic waves. She could feel it all. Miles away, in the treacherous Western Pass, she felt the clash of wills made manifest in tooth and steel. It was not sight, but a symphony of terror and fury that played out in her mind. The sharp, acrid scent of wolfsbane arrows embedding in rock where a wolf's shoulder would have been. The guttural snarl of Zade's wolf form, a sound of immense, primal power that she felt in the pit of her stomach. The sickening crunch of bone, the pained yelps of the wounded, the coppery tang of blood soaking into the cold mountain earth. Her body was a battlefield map. A searing pain in her left flank mirrored a deep gash on a Blackwood warrior. A sudden, blinding headache was the echo of a concussive blow. And through it all, a constant, blazing beacon, Zade. His energy was a maelstrom of ferocity and razor-sharp strategy. She felt his movements, not as images, but as instincts, a sudden lunge to the left. A powerful swipe of a massive paw, a strategic howl that redirected the flow of his fighters. He was a whirlwind of destruction, every ounce of the formidable Alpha she knew him to be. But she also felt the flickers of strain, the burn of overextended muscles, the sharp, hot sting of a claw that had found its mark on his shoulder. He was fighting, and he was hurt. A low whimper escaped Lyra's lips. She curled into herself, her arms wrapped around her knees, as if she could physically hold the pack together from her prison. This was the burden of the Oracle, to feel the pack's pain as her own, to be a living nerve center for its suffering. It was 1,000 times worse than any headache. Then, the tide of the battle shifted. She felt the moment Vorlag, the Shadow Fen Alpha, realized his ambush had been anticipated. His oily, arrogant aura curdled with shock and then with a desperate, cornered rage. He had gambled on the arrogance of youth and had lost. The high ground was useless when your enemy was waiting for you there. Zade's presence flared, a triumphant, savage roar that was both sound and feeling, a psychic shockwave that rolled through the pack bonds and resonated within Lyra's soul. It was followed by a decisive, final crunch of impact, and then the hostile, grizzled presence of Vorlag simply vanished. Snuffed out. The remaining Shadow Fen energies fractured, scattering like cockroaches in the light, their will to fight extinguished with their leader. It was over. The relief that washed over Lyra was so immense it was a physical pain. She slumped against the door, trembling, sweat cooling on her skin. The phantom pains faded, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The pack was safe. He was safe. Hours later, the sounds of the returning war party were vastly different from their departure. There was no frantic energy, only the heavy, grim cadence of victory tempered by loss. There were mournful howls for the dead, the shuffling steps of the wounded, and the low, respectful murmurs of those who had stayed behind. Lyra pushed herself up, her body protesting every movement. She needed to know. She needed to feel him whole. She didn't have to wait long. The familiar, confident footsteps approached her door, slower this time, weighted with the fatigue of battle and the mantle of command. The key turned in the lock with a definitive click. The door swung open. Zade stood on the threshold, and the scent that rolled off him was an overwhelming story of its own. Blood, both his and others, sweat, cold night air, and the faint, lingering bitterness of wolfsbane. He was breathing deeply, the sound ragged. Lyra. He said her name. And in that one word, the entire world shifted. The formality of Oracle was gone. The anger, the suspicion, the cold calculation, all of it had been stripped away by the brutality of the fight, leaving something raw and undeniable in its wake. "You were right," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "About the pass. About the wolfsbane. Your warning. It saved dozens of my warriors' lives. It turned a potential massacre into a decisive victory." He took a step into the room, and she instinctively took a step back, overwhelmed by his proximity, by the raw, vital power radiating from him. "You're hurt," she whispered, her oracle senses pinpointing the inflamed, throbbing energy around his shoulder and the lesser cuts that marred his skin. "It's nothing," he dismissed, but his voice was closer now. She could feel the heat of his body, could hear the slight hitch in his breath that betrayed the pain he would never admit to. "You felt it, didn't you? The battle." It wasn't an accusation. It was a realization, edged with something like awe. "I feel everything," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "It is my curse to bear." He was silent for a long moment, simply looking at her. She could feel his gaze tracing the lines of her face, the tired slope of her shoulders. "The pack owes you a debt," he said finally, his tone formal again, but the undercurrent was different. "I owe you a debt." "I ask for no payment," she replied, turning her face away. "Only to do my duty." "Your duty," he repeated softly. Then, she felt it, the whisper of movement, the displacement of air. He was reaching out. His fingers, still caked with grime and blood, gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The contact was not electric like the first. It was not a jolt of prophecy. It was warmer, slower, an intentional acknowledgement. A connection forged not by fate, but by shared sacrifice and proven loyalty. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. "The cage is open, Lyra," Zade murmured, his voice dropping to an intimate timbre that vibrated through her very core. "You are not a prisoner here anymore." With that, he withdrew his touch. His footsteps retreated, and he left, leaving the door to her chambers wide open. Lyra stood frozen in the center of the room, the ghost of his touch burning on her skin, the scent of his battle clinging to the air. The physical barrier was gone, but a new, more complicated one had been erected in its place. He had seen her value. He had trusted her. And in doing so, he had made the terrifying vision of their future feel less like a fantasy and more like an inevitable, approaching storm. The open door was a greater prison than the locked one had ever been. For 3 days, Lyra did not cross its threshold. The pack house echoed with a new, unsettling silence when she passed. The respectful whispers had been replaced by a void, a deliberate avoidance. She was no longer just the blind oracle. She was the woman who had bewitched the Alpha in the midst of a war, the seer who had prophesied her own rise. Her warning, which had saved lives, was now being twisted in the shadows, attributed not to duty, but to a cunning ambition. She felt the change in the energy of those around her. Where once there had been reverence, now there was suspicion. Where there had been pity for her blindness, now there was a cold, calculating assessment. She was a threat to the existing order, a variable that had destabilized the pack's hierarchy. On the 4th morning, the silence was broken by a new presence. The air in her chamber shifted, growing colder, carrying a scent of frost and a delicate, poisonous floral perfume. "So, this is the famous oracle." The voice was like shattering crystal, beautiful, sharp, and cold. It belonged to Celine, daughter of a powerful allied pack from the Western Ranges. She had arrived with her entourage the day after the battle, a prearranged political visit that now thrummed with new, unspoken significance. She was everything Lyra was not: sighted, politically connected, radiantly beautiful, and, according to pack gossip, the expected choice for Luna. "Lady Selene," Lyra said, keeping her voice neutral as she turned from her window. She didn't need sight to feel the woman's hostile appraisal. "I must admit, I expected more," Selene mused, her footsteps clicking softly on the stone as she circled Lyra. "The stories they are telling in the hall. It's quite the fantasy. The blind seer and the conquering Alpha. The pack is buzzing with it." Lyra remained still, her face a mask of calm. "The pack is recovering from a battle. They seek distractions." "Do they?" Selene stopped directly in front of her. "Or are they sensing a weakness? An Alpha distracted by a novelty?" The insult was deliberate, meant to provoke. Lyra simply tilted her head. "My function is to serve the Alpha and the pack. Nothing more." "Is it?" Selene's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "Let me be clear, Oracle. Alliances that have taken generations to build are at stake. Zade needs the strength of the Western Ranges behind him, not the superstitious mutterings of a helpless creature he keeps in the dark." Before Lyra could form a retort, a new, commanding energy filled the doorway. "Selene." Zade's voice was like a clap of thunder, tight with displeasure. "What are you doing here?" The woman's energy shifted instantly, the frost melting into a warm, honeyed charm. "Zade. I was merely introducing myself to your remarkable oracle, thanking her for her service during the recent unpleasantness." It was an obvious lie. Lyra felt Zade's focus shift from Selene to her, sensing the tension in the room. "The oracle's chambers are not for casual visitation," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Leave us." There was a moment of stiff silence before Selene's sweet, false voice returned. "Of course. Until the feast tonight, Alpha." Her footsteps retreated, the scent of frost and flowers lingering like a poison cloud. Zade waited until she was gone before he spoke again. His presence was a turbulent mix of exhaustion and simmering anger. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing that matters," Lyra replied, turning away, her arms crossed over her chest. "It matters if it upset you." The statement shocked her. Since when did her emotional state concern him? "She simply reminded me of my place," Lyra said, the words tasting bitter. "Or rather, the place I do not have." Zade moved further into the room. She could feel the weariness rolling off him, a weight that went beyond physical fatigue. Governing a victorious but wounded pack, while juggling political alliances and the disruptive prophecy she had unleashed, was taking its toll. "Your place is where I say it is," he said, his voice low. "Not where she, or anyone else, dictates." "Is it?" Lyra challenged, a flare of defiance rising in her chest. "She is right, isn't she? A union with her secures your borders, brings you armies. What does a union with me bring you, Alpha? A few confusing visions and a pack that whispers behind your back." He closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides. She could feel the heat of his body, could smell the leather and steel on him, undercut with the scent of his own frustration. "It brings me a truth I cannot ignore," he growled, his voice raw. "It brings me a connection that has haunted me since I touched your hand. I fought a battle with the memory of your vision seared behind my eyes, Lyra. While I was tearing out the throat of my enemy, all I could see was you." His confession hung in the air, stark and undeniable. It was not a confession of love, but of obsession. Of a fate that had its claws in him as deeply as it did in her. Lyra's breath hitched. She was trembling, caught between the urge to flee and the terrifying desire to step closer. "I did not ask for this," she whispered, her defiance crumbling. "Neither did I," he admitted, his voice softening slightly. "But it is here. And I am done pretending it is not." He didn't touch her. But the space between them was alive with the tension of their shared dilemma. A problem that could not be solved with tooth and claw. The open door behind him offered escape, but Lyra knew, with a sinking certainty, that there was no escape from this. From him. The unwelcome dawn of their destined future was breaking, and it was illuminating a path fraught with political peril and the venom of those, like Selene, who had everything to lose. The open door became a mockery. Though Lyra was now free to walk the halls, an invisible leash tugged at her throat, tightening with every suspicious glance and every hushed conversation that died at her approach. Zade's public acknowledgement of her aid had not quelled the rumors, it had fertilized them. She was no longer a mere novelty, she was a contender, and the pack was choosing sides. Her only refuge was the ancient pack archives, a dusty, forgotten wing of the stronghold that smelled of old parchment and dried herbs. Here, among the tactile history of her people, she could almost forget the tension of the present. She would run her fingers over raised, embossed leather covers and fragile scrolls, listening to the stories they told of past alphas, great battles, and yes, even the oracles who had come before her. She was seeking answers. A precedent. Had any oracle ever become lunar? The histories were silent, or perhaps the records had been purged. The two roles were meant to be separate, the lunar, the heart of the pack, the oracle, its soul. To combine them was, in the eyes of tradition, a dangerous perversion. On the third day of her solitude in the archives, the equilibrium of dust and silence was shattered. I knew I'd find you here, hiding. Kaelin's voice, usually a source of comfort, was strained. He moved into the small, secluded chamber she favored, his scent carrying the sharp tang of anxiety. I am not hiding, Lyra replied, her fingers pausing on the brittle edge of a scroll. I am researching. Researching what, child? A way to undo what has been done. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness. It is all anyone can speak of. The feast tonight. It is no longer just a celebration of victory. Celine's father, Alpha Brom, has arrived. He has brought half his war council with him. Lyra's blood ran cold. The feast. Zade had commanded her presence, a direct order she could not refuse. It is a demonstration, she whispered. He is showcasing his intended alliance. It is a trap, Kaelin corrected, his voice dropping to an urgent murmur. For you, and for Zade. Celine will be seated at his right hand, draped in the colors of her pack, a living symbol of a united future. And you will be on display, the strange, blind seer he keeps in his court. They will watch how Zade treats you. Any sign of favor, any hint of the connection you spoke of, will be seen as an insult to Brom and a rejection of his daughter. What would you have me do? Lyra asked, a spark of her old fire returning. Feign illness? Cower in this room. I would have you be careful, Kaelin implored. These are not pack warriors who respect your gift. These are politicians. They do not fight with claws, but with words and influence. They can destroy a reputation with a well-placed whisper, and they can turn an alpha against his own instincts with the promise of power. His words painted a vivid, terrifying picture. She was walking into a den of wolves far more dangerous than those of Shadow Fen. Zade would not be swayed by such things, she said, but the statement lacked conviction. Zade is an alpha who has just won his first major conflict, Kaelin said gently. He is surrounded by older, more experienced alphas who will counsel him toward stability, toward strength. They will tell him that a vision is a fleeting thing, but a political alliance is the bedrock of a lasting legacy. They will tell him you are a risk. He left her with that chilling assessment. Lyra remained in the archives, but the words of the past could no longer shield her from the realities of the present. She was caught in a gilded cage, her freedom an illusion. She could walk the halls, but every path led to the same inescapable conclusion. The feast tonight was a battlefield, and she was the prize, the pawn, and the potential casualty all at once. As the afternoon light began to fade, a young she-wolf arrived, not with a meal, but with a bundle of fabric. From the Alpha, the girl said, her voice a mixture of awe and nervousness. For the feast. Lyra unfolded the garments. The fabric was unlike anything she had ever owned. It was soft and heavy, a deep, midnight blue velvet that felt like cool water against her skin. Embroidered into the cuffs and hem were intricate, raised patterns, wolves and moons and stars, stitched with silver thread. It was the gown of a high-ranking lady, a statement far removed from her simple grey robes. It was not a kindness. It was a weapon. By dressing her in this, Zade was making his stance clear. He was elevating her, forcing the pack and his guests to see her not as a secluded mystic, but as a woman of status. He was throwing her into the heart of the political storm, armed with nothing but a beautiful dress and a prophecy he himself did not fully understand. As she let the rich fabric slide through her fingers, Lyra felt a grim resolve settle over her. Kaelin was right. Tonight was a trap. But she was the oracle of the Blackwood pack. She would not go to this feast as a helpless lamb to the slaughter. She would go as what she was, a seer who had stared into the future and had not flinched. Let them watch. Let them whisper. The vision had shown her a crown. It was time to see if she had the strength to bear its weight. The great hall was a tempest of sound and scent, a chaotic symphony that threatened to overwhelm Lyra's senses. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat, spiced wine, and the potent aroma of dozens of dominant werewolves from different packs. Laughter boomed, glasses clinked, and beneath it all ran the constant, sibilant river of whispers. She could feel the weight of countless eyes upon her the moment she stepped into the cavernous space. She had allowed a maid to help her into the midnight blue gown, the silver embroidery cool against her skin. It was an armor of sorts, a declaration. She held her head high, her milky eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance, navigating the periphery of the hall by memory and the subtle parting of the crowd before her. But every path in the great hall eventually led to the high table. She didn't need to see it to feel its presence. It was a sun of concentrated power and attention. And there, at its center, was Zade. His energy was a controlled inferno, a mantle of authority worn with a new, sharp-edged awareness. To his right, a cold, brilliant light emanated from Selene, her laughter a tinkling, calculated sound. And to his left, a presence that felt like a mountain, old, immovable, and radiating a judgmental calm. Alpha Zade. Lyra found a small, vacant space along the wall, hoping to remain an observer in the shadows. It was a futile hope. The oracle graces us with her presence. Zade's voice cut through the din, not loud, but carrying the absolute authority of an alpha. The hall quieted noticeably. Come. You should not linger in the shadows on such a night. It was not a request. It was a command that dragged her into the spotlight. Every step toward the high table felt like walking on knives. The whispers intensified, sharpened with curiosity and malice. She felt Selene's gaze like a physical shove, cold and disdainful. But it was Alpha Zade's silent assessment that was the most unnerving. She could feel his ancient, penetrating focus, a wolf sizing up a strange, new creature in its territory. Lyra, Zade said as she reached the table. His voice was neutral, but she caught the faintest undercurrent of something else. Possession, perhaps. He was showcasing her. I trust you are finding the celebrations to your liking. The pack's joy is palpable, Alpha, she replied, her voice carefully modulated. Joy is a fleeting emotion. A new, gravelly voice interjected. Alpha Zade. His voice was like two stones grinding together. A wise leader plans for what comes after. For stability. For lasting strength. The unspoken challenge hung in the air between them, a gauntlet thrown at Zade's feet. Strength comes in many forms, Zade countered, his tone easy, but Lyra felt the tension coiling in him. The strength of a warrior's arm, the strength of an alliance, and the strength of foresight. He turned his attention fully to Lyra, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Tell me, Oracle. In your foresight, what do you see for the future of the Blackwood pack? It was a deliberate provocation. He was forcing the issue, forcing her, in front of everyone. He was testing her, testing the pack, testing Zade. The air grew so thick with anticipation it was hard to breathe. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the trap. If she spoke of anything resembling their shared future, she would be seen as ambitious, as trying to sway him in front of a rival alpha. If she demurred, she would look weak, her prophecy discredited. She closed her eyes, not that it made a difference, and let her senses expand beyond the stifling politics of the room. She reached for the deeper currents, the threads of fate that wove around the pack. What she found was not a clear image, but a feeling. A chill. I see, a fork in the river of our destiny, she began, her voice gaining the resonant, hollow quality it took on during a true seeing. The hall fell utterly silent. One path is paved with gilded promises, smooth and shining. It speaks of powerful friends and quiet halls. She sensed Selene's smug satisfaction. But the water that flows there is stagnant, Lyra continued, her voice dropping. It smells of rot and forgotten oaths. It leads to a gilded cage, where the song of the pack grows faint. A ripple of unease went through the crowd. And the other path? Zade prompted, his voice intense, focused solely on her. The other is shrouded in storm clouds, she said, a tremor entering her voice as the chilling sensation intensified. The way is hard, littered with the bones of doubt and the thorns of betrayal. It will demand a price in blood and tears. She paused, turning her head slightly, instinctively toward him. But the water that flows there is alive. It is wild and free. And it leads you home. For a moment, there was no sound. Her words, cryptic yet visceral, had painted a choice not between two women, but between two futures for the entire pack. The spell was broken by Celine's sharp, dismissive laugh. Poetic riddles. Is this what the great Blackwood pack relies on? A blind girl's nightmares. But Zade was not listening to her. He was still looking at Lyra, his gaze so intense she felt scorched by it. He had understood. The gilded path was Celine, the alliance, the safe choice. The stormy path was her. The vision. The difficult, dangerous, but true path. "Thank you, Oracle," he said, his voice low and intimate, silencing the room once more. "Your clarity, as always, is illuminating." He had not chosen. He had not declared anything. But in that moment, he had publicly validated her, her gift, and the terrifying future she represented over the safe, political alternative sitting beside him. The crown of whispers she wore was no longer just one of rumor, but one of immense, dangerous consequence. The battle lines for his soul, and for the soul of the pack, had been drawn in front of everyone. The feast ended not with a celebration, but with a silent, seismic shift. Lyra's prophecy had been a stone dropped into a still pond, and the ripples were tearing the pack apart. The air in the Blackwood stronghold was thick with fractured loyalties. Zade's warriors, who revered strength above all, were divided. Some saw Lyra's stormy path as the true way of the wolf, wild and untamed. Others saw it as a reckless gamble, a rejection of the security Alpha offered. Lyra felt it all from her chambers. The discord a constant, grating hum against her senses. She had retreated there after Zade's dismissive nod had granted her leave, her body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. She had thrown the gauntlet, and he had picked it up. The game was in motion, and the stakes were her life, his rule, and the future of the pack. She did not have long to wait for the next move. The door to her chamber opened without a knock. It was Zade. His energy was a blizzard contained in human skin, furious, volatile, and dangerously cold. The scent of cold night air clung to him, as if he had been pacing the battlements. "You speak of thorns of betrayal," he bit out, his voice a low, menacing growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "Explain." So that was the part that had burrowed under his skin. Not the gilded cage, not the stormy path. The betrayal. The vision was not specific, Lyra said, standing her ground though every instinct told her to submit to the fury of her alpha. It was a feeling. A shadow that clings to the more difficult path. "A shadow," he repeated, stalking closer. "In my pack. In my home. While I am being counseled by so-called allies to discard the one person who has given me nothing but truth." He stopped directly in front of her. "Your words have given my enemies a weapon. They are already whispering that the betrayal you foresee is my own, that by clinging to this vision, I am betraying my pack's best interests." The cleverness of it, the political poison, made Lyra's stomach clench. She had played right into their hands. "That is not what I meant," she insisted, a desperate edge to her voice. "What you meant is irrelevant," he roared, his control finally snapping. He slammed his fist against the heavy wooden post of her bed, the impact making the entire frame shudder. Lyra flinched violently. "All that matters is what they heard." And what they heard was doubt. "You have painted a target on my back, and you have given every dissenter in this hall a prophecy to justify their treachery." He was breathing heavily, his rage a physical force pressing in on her. In that moment, he was not the man from the vision, nor the one who had trusted her warning about the Western Pass. He was pure alpha, cornered and dangerous. "I have only ever reported what the gift shows me," Lyra shot back, her own fear morphing into a sharp, defensive anger. "You demanded I speak. You forced my sight into your political games. Do not blame me for the shadows you yourself asked me to illuminate." Her defiance seemed to startle him. In the tense silence that followed, the air crackled with their clashing energies. It was not the electric connection of the prophecy, but the raw, sparking friction of two powerful wills colliding. His anger seemed to recede, not vanishing, but transforming into something darker, more intense. She felt him studying her in the dim light, his gaze a tangible weight. "You are not what I expected, Lyra," he said, his voice dropping to a husky, conflicted murmur. "You hide in shadows and speak in riddles, but when challenged, you stand your ground like the most seasoned warrior. It is infuriating." He moved, circling around her, like a predator reassessing his prey. "They want me to send you away. To a temple deep in the mountains, where oracles are meant to live out their days in silent contemplation. Away from me. Away from this complication." A cold dread, colder than any she had ever known, seized Lyra's heart. Exile. A living death. "Is that your command, Alpha?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He was behind her now, so close she could feel the heat of his chest against her back. His breath stirred the hair at her temple. The proximity was unnerving, intimate. A silent war was raging within him, and she was the battlefield. "My wolf howls at the thought," he confessed, his voice raw and low, a secret uttered in the dark. "It is a savage, possessive sound I do not fully understand. It rejects the very idea." He lifted a hand, and she felt his fingers hover just above the skin of her bare shoulder, a hair's breadth from touching her. Every nerve in her body was screaming, acutely aware of that tiny, charged space between his skin and hers. The romantic tension was a live wire, thrumming with the promise of the vision and the agony of their current reality. "But I am not just a wolf," he continued, the words a tortured admission. "I am an alpha. And an alpha must sometimes silence the howl of his own heart for the good of his pack." His hand fell away without making contact. The loss of that almost touch was a physical pain. "The Howling Mountain," he said, his voice once again formal, decision made. "The ancient oracle's temple. You will leave at first light. It is for your own protection, and for the stability of the pack." He walked to the door, his footsteps heavy with the weight of the crown he wore. Lyra stood frozen, the words first light echoing in the sudden silence like a death knell. He had chosen. He had chosen the pack over the prophecy, politics over passion. The stormy path was to be abandoned before it had even begun. But as the door shut behind him, Lyra's trembling stopped. A fierce, cold resolve solidified within her. He thought he was sending away a passive seer. He was wrong. The vision had shown her a crown. It had shown her a home. And she would not let him, or anyone, tear it from her without a fight. First light would come. But she would not be going to the Howling Mountain. The silence Zade left behind was not one of defeat, but of ignition. His words, first light, the Howling Mountain, were not a sentence to be endured, but a spark thrown onto the dry tinder of Lyra's resolve. The passive acceptance that had defined her life as the oracle burned away, leaving behind a core of hardened steel. He thought he was protecting her, protecting the pack. He believed he was making a noble sacrifice. But he was wrong. Sending her away would not avert the betrayal she had sensed, it would guarantee it. It would show their enemies that their alpha could be swayed, that a true seeing could be discarded for political convenience. It would be the first crack in his authority. The very weakness the shadows were waiting to exploit. She would not go. The decision brought a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. She moved through her chambers with a new purpose, her hands skimming over her few possessions. She would need to travel light, to move unseen. She shed the beautiful, burdensome velvet gown, changing back into her simple, dark grey robes, the uniform of the oracle, but now it felt like a warrior's leathers. As the moon reached its zenith, casting a silver glow she could feel through her window, she knew it was time. The pack house was at its quietest, the revelry of the feast finally succumbed to exhausted slumber. She pressed her ear to the door, listening. The guard Zade had posted, a precaution or a jailer, she wasn't sure, shifted his weight with a soft creak of leather. He was there. A plan, fragile and desperate, formed in her mind. It relied on the one thing she had always possessed, the pack's unwavering, superstitious reverence for her gift. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she let out a low, guttural moan, letting her body slump against the door with a convincing thud. She then began to whisper, letting her voice take on the hollow, resonant tone of a trance, just loud enough to be heard through the wood. The blood on the stone, the traitor's mark," she murmured, lacing her words with a thread of psychic pressure, a trick she'd learned to make her pronouncements feel more visceral. The moon reveals it, the shadow with a friendly face. She heard the guard outside go perfectly still. So much blood, she whimpered, letting her voice break. Why won't it stop? The lock clicked. The door swung open a few inches. Oracle, the young warrior's voice was tight with alarm. Are you unwell? What do you see? This was the moment. As he leaned in, his concern overriding his orders, Lyra acted. She didn't fight him. She didn't run. Instead, her hand snapped up, framing his face. Her touch was not violent, but searingly intense. She poured all her focus, all her remaining energy, into a single, fabricated image, a flash of him, this very guard, lying in a pool of his own blood, a shadowy figure standing over him. It was a lie. A brutal, necessary lie. The warrior gasped, staggering back from her as if burned, his mind reeling from the false vision. By the moon, he choked out, his loyalty shattered by the fear she had planted. Warn them, Lyra whispered, swaying on her feet as if drained. The shadow is among us. While he was disoriented, staring at his own imagined death, she slipped past him into the darkened corridor. She moved like a wisp of smoke, her bare feet making no sound on the cold stone. She knew the servants' passages, the forgotten routes used to keep the pack house running unseen. Her destination was not the main gate, but the old, disused crypts that lay beneath the stronghold, a place of bones and silence where no one would think to look for her. But as she turned a corner into a narrow, moonlit courtyard used for hanging laundry, a massive, familiar form emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. Zade. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable in the darkness, but his energy was a turbulent mix of fury and a grudging, unwilling admiration. Did you really think it would be that easy? His voice was dangerously quiet. Lyra's heart plummeted. She was caught. All her resolve, her desperate gamble, had failed. The Howling Mountain is not my destiny, she stated, her voice trembling only slightly. And sending me away will not save your pack. It will doom it. You presume to know the fate of my pack better than I do, he growled, taking a step forward. The air crackled with the tension between them, a physical force. I see it, she cried out, the frustration and fear of the last days finally breaking through. I see the betrayal festering in the comfort you choose. I see the strength you sacrifice for a hollow peace. You asked for clarity, Zade, and when I gave it to you, you decided to blind yourself. He closed the distance between them in a flash, his hands gripping her upper arms, not to hurt her, but to force her to stillness, to feel the truth of his own conflict. And what would you have me do, Lyra? He snarled, his face inches from hers. His stormy eyes, she knew, would be blazing. Throw away an alliance that has protected us for generations? Ignore the counsel of my elders? Declare a blind seer, who has known nothing but these walls, as my Luna based on a single, maddening vision? Tell me, what is the wise choice for an alpha? His grip was firm, his body a wall of heat and muscle. Trapped against him, the romantic tension was unbearable, a potent cocktail of anger, desperation, and the undeniable, magnetic pull the prophecy had forged between them. The wise choice, she breathed, her defiance melting into a raw, aching honesty, is to trust the bond you felt. The one that howls inside you. The one that terrifies you as much as it terrifies me. Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a surrender. For a long, heart-stopping moment, he didn't move. He just looked down at her, his breath mingling with hers, his hands still holding her. The battle within him was visible in the tight line of his jaw, the tremor in his arms. Slowly, one hand released her arm and came up to cup her cheek. His thumb stroked the arch of her cheekbone, a touch so unexpectedly gentle it made her want to weep. You ask me to risk everything, he whispered, his voice thick with a war she could only feel. The vision already has, she whispered back. And then his lips were on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a confession, a release of all the pent-up tension, confusion, and raw, untamed desire that had been building between them since the moment their hands had first touched. It was fire and lightning, a collision of two destinies that could no longer be denied. Lyra's hands came up, fisting in the fabric of his tunic, holding on as the world tilted on its axis. In that kiss, she felt the crown, the storm, the home. It was all there, real and terrifying and magnificent. But as suddenly as it began, he tore himself away, stumbling back a step as if shocked by his own actions. The conflict was back in his eyes, sharper than ever. "Go," he rasped, his voice ragged. "To the crypts. Hide. Do not let anyone find you." He was letting her go. Not to the mountain, but into the darkness of his own domain. "Zade," she started. "Go," he commanded, the Alpha's voice returning, but it was laced with a desperate, possessive fervor. "Before I come to my senses and lock you away forever, or before I throw all caution to the wind and claim you here, in the moonlight, for the entire pack to see." Without another word, Lyra turned and fled into the deeper shadows, her lips still burning from his kiss, her heart thundering with a terrifying, triumphant hope. He had not chosen the pack. He had not chosen the alliance. In the end, caught between duty and desire, he had chosen her. And in doing so, he had plunged them both into a deeper, more dangerous conflict than either of them could possibly imagine.